Nikki DeAger is one of the latest examples of transsexuals who have come out recently on her YouTube channel.
I was born in the wrong body, which means that I am transgender.
However, there are many people who do not have the courage to come out as transgender due to the society's pressure and the negative responses they may receive from the public. Like Caitlyn Jenner, who waited for many years to be able to reveal her true identity. The term transgender can be defined as denoting or relating to a person whose sense of personal identity and gender does not correspond with their birth sex. There are many films that tackle issues regarding transgenders. However, these films do not always portray a progressive view on this matter. This is due to the existence of the transphobic gaze, which works to visually construct the characters as objects of this fear. This video essay will discuss and analyze the following films and compare them in terms of progressiveness: Albert Nobbs by Rodrigo Garcia and The Danish Girl by Tom Hooper. An in-depth analysis of The Danish Girl will be carried out. The film is about a married man who undergoes one of the sex change operations. Judith Butler's gender theory will help to support the following claim: an exploration on the progressiveness of the film The Danish Girl in terms of its portrayal of transgenders through the use of mise-en-scène, costume, and camera techniques. The film is constructed in a way that imprisons the protagonist Einar within a confined space, portraying the entrapment that transgenders tend to feel before revealing their true identity. Close-ups reduce the amount of space, creating a confined space that the protagonist has to move around. This is a form of entrapment and restriction from freedom. We can argue that men were seen as a dominant figure in the family where certain expectations were made, like having to provide for their family to prove he's worthy of being a man in society. We see the transgender gaze here. It is neither a male gaze or a female gaze. The film doesn't show an ideal sexualization of a man or a woman, but rather an appreciation for the beauty of femininity itself.
I know men.
In this period, men tend to take up more space in society more so than women. This is physically shown in the setup of the frame where Einar is taking up more space than the dress he is holding. There is a sense of imprisonment through the motif of windows, bars, and frames. Einar is frequently positioned within bars and windows, illustrating a cage-like setting. People with mental disorders are sent to or kept in psychiatric institutes. In the same way, the use of windows and bars around Einar constructs a prison-like setting, as if he is imprisoned in an institute, indicating that people back then did not understand the concept of transgenders. The film is therefore implicitly conveying that transgenders should be imprisoned, because of being different. In this sense, the film is not progressive. There is also entrapment in Albert Nobbs, in which the protagonist constantly wears a breast binder under a tight-fitting dark suit. Nobbs also feels the constant pressure to hide his biological sexuality. The film follows the transition from Einar to Lily. According to Judith Butler, gender is a social construct and therefore is forever changing. During Lily's first emergence in the film, she is wearing a gown made of shiny, luxurious fabric. This amidst the joy she is experiencing with dressing as her true self. As Butler says, clothing is a powerful medium to reconstruct one's identity. At the beginning of Lily's life, the color palette of her clothing is somewhat restricted and becomes more colorful later on. The film uses doors and tunnels to represent the shift from male to female and vice versa. The protagonist is often positioned in between doors or is seen walking through doors. This is a common struggle that transgenders tend to deal with, having to switch between two identities due to social pressure. The protagonist rips off his constricting male costume and is confronted with his biological self. Butler argues that gender is not biological but is performative. We see this through his attempt to alter his body parts to look more like a woman. Applying the male gaze on a male body is a criticism on the gaze as being sexist, because it is indicating that the gaze can only be applied on a female body. We can see this as the film portrays this scene as something visually unpleasing. In addition, there is also a transphobic gaze because the scene shows close-ups of a man's body hiding his phallus, and positioning his body in an unnatural way, making the scene rather uncomfortable to watch. The use of touch introduces the desire to transition from Einar to Lily, male to female, done by the frequent use of close-ups whenever Einar touches fabric on female clothing, bringing us into his mental subjectivity. Touch and tactility illustrate the interwovenness that the protagonist has with femininity, and hence the desire to become female both inside and out. According to Merriam-Webster, we can argue that Einar uses touch as a way to stimulate her inner femininity. The feeling of liberation from coming out and revealing one's true self to the world is challenging yet can be very liberating. Towards the end of the film, there is a sense of Lily's liberation from Einar. Whenever Lily's character is in play, the costumes are way more fluid, allowing more movement, and the colors become more vibrant, illustrating the confidence that she finally feels. At the end of the film, when the protagonist has fully become a woman, we see that she is wearing many layers of all kinds of fabrics, indicating the wholeness of womanhood. Nature becomes a frequent appearance near the end, indicating how she is finally in her most natural state and form. The wide-angle shots and long shots give the protagonist more space and is less confined, illustrating the liberation that the protagonist experiences when she is her true self, and from society's pressure. This is similar in Albert Nobbs when Nobbs is wearing a female's costume. We can see that she feels liberated by the release of her binders and through the act of being able to run freely. The scene is shot on the beach, which is often associated with liberty. In this way, The Danish Girl is a progressive film despite it being a typical Hollywood story that follows the life of a transgender. However, in both films, the transgender protagonist dies before the end of the film. This trend causes the film to return to a certain form of gender stability. In other words, the death of these transgender characters produce a heteronormative view. A different interpretation could be that the deaths of these characters are used to raise awareness for the often difficult lives of transgender people. In The Danish Girl, the additional role of the wife Gerda reduces the amount of attention paid to the transgender character Ina, as we sympathize for Gerda for the loss of her husband, while also experiencing her roller coaster of emotions. This minimizes the impact of the message that the film is trying to convey about the struggles of being a transgender. We can criticize that the film strongly reinforces gender stereotypes, femininity, through costumes and acting. The protagonist is heavily convinced that he must act in a feminine way to be seen and accepted as a real woman. Another criticism would be the fact that the trans actors in both films are not transgender in real life, reinforcing the idea that anyone can cross-dress and become the opposite gender. It is neglecting the vast effort, negativity, and pressure that transgenders actually struggle with daily.